In connection with Flowers for Algernon, the identity theme is obviously highly relevant. As earlier mentioned, is the identity theme a big part of the short story, and the articles, the death of language and English as a global language, a good or bad thing, are very much about identity. In Flowers for Algernon, Charlie experiences this identity change because of his intellectual change. In The Death of Language, is it asked, what happens to your identity when your mother tongue is lost forever? And it is argued that your language is a big part of your identity. Your native language is closely connected to your nationality, and it makes you a part of a group. It makes you a part of this nation. And because of the globalization and the diffusion of a global language like English, the number of smaller languages is dropping rapidly. Languages that only a few people speak. And if you speak a language then that no one uses, your language can seem useless. And in a globalized world, it can seem like there is no reason to learn a language that no one speaks. But what happens to your identity when your mother tongue is lost? Paul Lewis has argued, as it is described in the article "The Death of Language," that if you start to see your language as useless, you will see your identity as useless too, because language is such a big part of your identity, and this will eventually, according to Paul Lewis, lead to, and his theory, lead to social disruption and depression and drug abuse, etc. Only almost only bad things. And if that happens, traditional values are lost, and it breaks the connection between children and earlier generations. And that theory is supported by the way the writer of English as a global language, a good or bad thing, writes about her language and her identity, even though she doesn't say that that it will lead to this social disruption. But she wants her child to speak Finnish because she's from Finland, and it's a big part of her identity, her mother tongue, and she feels like her native language is a part of her identity, and it should be a part of her child's identity. So she wants her child to be a part of that identity too, and that can be an example of how the connection between children and earlier generations are broken, because the child may not have the ability to speak to the grandparents, and that breaks that connection, because the grandparents can't speak English, and the grandchild in this example can't speak Finnish. In Flowers for Algernon, Charlie's identity change, and he's through development, and when he is again mentally retarded, in the end, he has learned something from the experience. He has developed, and his identity has developed, even though he's been mentally retarded again, and he's at the same intellectual level as in the beginning of the text. And that development can be compared with the transition Nick experiences in Hemingway's short story Indian Camp, because the experience in the Indian camp develops the main character, Nick, and develops his identity just like Charlie's journey, Charlie's development through intellectual levels develops his identity.